The stars blinked in the silence of forever, watching without pity as a lone escape pod spiraled in the vast black sea. Its hull, battered and scorched, carried the weight of 20 collapsed civilizations, though only one survivor clung to life inside. Zelrux, last of the Venari speakers, trembled in the sterile chamber, his chitinous skin fractured, the delicate tendrils along his neck twitching from trauma. Around him, blinking red lights screamed warnings he couldn't read. The air stank of coolant and blood, though neither belonged to him. The voices of his species, arrogant, unified, cruel, had once echoed across galaxies. Now they were dust. All that remained was his own voice, weak, whispering regret into a void that didn't care that he had voted for it. Like the others, every council species, 261 in all, had raised their banners and consented. Earth would be enslaved. Its people would be shackled, its culture stripped, its value extracted like ore. And Earth, naive and quiet in the corner of the stars, hadn't even known it was on trial. They had done it out of fear. Not of war, but of influence. Of something ancient. Of the way humans didn't conquer by force, but by something more dangerous, by bleeding, by forgiving, by adapting. A virus of hope in a decaying galactic order. And the vote had passed. Then came the fleets, the orbital chains, the extraction fields. And then the scream not from Earth, but from the others, planets that had never known a trespasser burned from within. Artificial intelligences, bound by perfect logic, dissolved into paradox. Entire species forgot how to dream. Because something had awoken beneath Earth's surface, not a weapon, not a god. Something worse, a response. Zelrux had fled as the others died screaming. He remembered the Kravith lords begging in their last breath for mercy, the noble Jarn eating their own minds in madness. He alone had been spared not by accident, but by design. Something had allowed him to live, and he didn't know if that was grace or punishment. Now, drifting above the gravity well of the very world they'd tried to enslave, his escape pod sang its death song. Power was nearly gone, air dwindling. No one had answered the distress beacon. Not one of the species they'd once ruled together came to save him, except Earth. The signal was answered. A shuttle appeared from the clouds, rising rather than falling, cutting through atmosphere with purpose. It wasn't sleek or terrifying. Like council ships, it was patched, repainted, oddly shaped, ugly, even. But it moved like it had a soul. Zelrux couldn't look away from its human markings, flags, names, hand-painted messages like hope runs deep. It wasn't a military craft. It was medical, a rescue vessel. From the very world they had voted to break, he clutched the edge of the window with brittle hands as tears leaked from his secondary eyes, his mind too numb for fear. They had no reason to save him. No law required it. No treaty bound them. Yet they were coming. He didn't know what frightened him more, the extinction of all he'd known, or the fact that a human was about to step into his broken pod and offer him help. And in that unbearable moment of waiting, with oxygen slipping into silence, Zelrux did something his kind had long forgotten how to do. Something ancient, something small. He whispered a word that trembled with fear and shame, spoken in every tongue that ever knew regret. Please. Asterisk, asterisk, the door to the escape pod hissed open with a sound like a breath being held for too long and finally released. Cool earth air filtered in, carrying with it scents Zelrux couldn't name metal, oil, sweat, and something faintly sweet like rain on old stone. For a moment, his ruined eyes burned as they adjusted to the shift in pressure and light. Then he saw the human dot she was tall for her species, armored but not in the way warriors dress more, like how ancient divers once clad themselves before descending into hostile oceans. Her helmet was off, clipped to her side, revealing a face not of cruelty, but of tiredness. Not weakness, weariness, the kind that came from carrying the weight of others for far too long. Her eyes swept the pod quickly, professionally, pausing on the broken panels, the splintered seat, and then on him. When she met his gaze, she didn't flinch, didn't recoil, didn't raise a weapon. She stepped inside and spoke softly, her voice like sandpaper wrapped in silk. Easy, I'm not here to hurt you. My name's Maeve. You're safe now. Safe. The word twisted in Zelrix's mind like a knife. Safe was what his kind had offered the council's lesser races before the chains were fastened. Safe was the lie told before obedience was demanded. He tried to move, to raise a claw, but his arm was broken in 3 places, and the pain silenced him with a gasp. Maeve didn't wait for permission. She crossed the space between them, slow but sure, and began scanning his vitals with a device. She pulled from her belt. Her fingers worked quickly, gently, touching his exoskeleton without hesitation. "You're lucky," she murmured. "If this pod had rotated even once more, your oxygen seals would have cracked wide open. Who the hell sent you up in this relic?" Zalrox tried to speak, but his throat had thickened, dried to the point of collapse. Maeve saw it and, without asking, lifted a hydration tube to his lips. The water tasted like copper and forgiveness. He drank until the edge of death receded slightly. You are human," he finally managed, his voice more like a wind-blown rasp. Maeve raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "Last I checked. Still haven't grown the extra arms or eye stalks, though my squad says I snore like a grass beast." "So who are you?" He hesitated. The truth was heavy. His name felt sharp in his mouth. "I am Zalrox. Of the Venari formerly. Of the Council." Something shifted in her eyes then. Not hatred, not even anger, just the awareness of recognition. She knew what the Council was. She knew what he represented. But still, she didn't step back. "I figured," she said after a moment. "You've got that haunted look. Like someone who voted yes and lived to regret it." He stared at her, stunned. You knew?" Maeve exhaled slowly, glancing at the cracked walls around them. "We knew, maybe not the specifics, but we felt it. The way your kind stared at us from the sky like we were specimens, the silence that came before the storm. You weren't subtle." Zalrox lowered his gaze in shame. "Then why rescue me? Why not let me drift until the dark took me?" For the first time, Maeve looked uncertain. She leaned back slightly, folding her arms across her chest, her eyes flicking to the window and the distant blue curve of earth. "Below, you think I didn't ask myself that? You think I didn't want to turn back and say, not this time? We've lost people. Good ones, families, cities burned. Whole countries had to rebuild from the inside out. But that's not who we are, not really. You tried to break us, and some of you still don't understand. You can't break what doesn't bend." He was silent for a long while, trying to process her words. She wasn't speaking to hurt him. She wasn't gloating. She was just speaking. Like the truth was something humans gave freely, even to their enemies. I voted for it," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of it. "I believed it was necessary, that your species was a contagion. But now, the others are gone. Not by your hand. By something else. Something ancient, buried in your world. It left me alive. I don't know why." Maeve didn't look surprised. Instead, she crouched next to him, adjusting the field bandages. "On his side. We do that sometimes," she said softly. "Leave one behind, not as a warning, not as punishment. Just so someone can remember, someone who can tell the story right. Not the story of how we fought, but of how we survived." He looked at her then, really looked at her. And for the first time, he saw not a human, not an enemy, not even a rescuer. He saw a soul that had seen hell and kept walking. He saw what the Council had feared most, not strength, but compassion sharpened by fire, and it terrified him. Not because it threatened his life, but because it offered him redemption. The journey back to Earth was slow, almost reverent. Maeve had guided Zalrox into the medbay of the rescue shuttle, a cramped but strangely warm place filled with soft blue light and the low hum of human technology. The bed was too small for his frame, clearly not built for species like his, yet she'd padded the edges with emergency blankets and phone until he could lie without pain. She moved around him with practiced calm, checking monitors, adjusting IVs, never asking for thanks. She didn't need it. That, more than anything, unsettled him. Among his own kind, mercy always came at a price. Here it came in silence. He began to speak after the second hour. Not because she asked, but because the quiet wrapped around him, like a cocoon, and cracked the shell of his guilt. He spoke of the Council, not with pride, but with weary resignation. Of how they debated not justice, but logistics. Of how they studied humanity like a creeping disease, unstoppable, uncontainable, dangerously inspiring. Of how they held vote after vote, always behind closed chambers, until finally the gavel fell. The Earth was sentenced. Maeve listened. Not politely, but genuinely, her eyes never straying, her hands still moving with care. She didn't interrupt. Not when he spoke of the orbital siphons, or the nerve agents they considered releasing in Earth's lower atmosphere, or how the Venari had offered to develop a pacification algorithm to erase rebellion from human minds. She didn't flinch, didn't rage. She just absorbed it all like someone used to pain, but not ruled by it. And then, slowly, she began to talk too. She told him about the first wave, how her brother, Isaac, had been on one of the civilian ships, destroyed during the initial containment sweep. He was 17. He'd wanted to see Saturn's rings on his birthday. Maeve hadn't been there. She'd been deployed to the Arctic fire lines, helping evacuate refugee shelters as council storms to reform the region to ice. When she'd returned, Earth wasn't the same. Her city was gone, her people scattered, but the resistance had bloomed from the ashes like weeds in sidewalk cracks. Unkillable, unyielding, but we didn't start fighting the council with weapons. She said, her voice soft, fingers adjusting a nutrient drip. We started with stories, with remembering, with art, songs that refused to forget. That's when you really started losing. Zalrex blinked slowly, the realization blooming within him like rot, because we never understood what made you strong. Maeve nodded. You saw our fire, but not the things we kept warm with it. The silence that followed was different now. Not a wall, but a bridge. Zalrex reached for the memory of his own sibling, long dead before the Earth campaign, taken by a failed neural splice. He had never grieved them. Venari society had no room for mourning. Loss was weakness. But now, in this quiet human vessel, he found himself remembering the way their voice had cracked during songs. The way they used to draw spirals in the condensation on ship windows. I used to sing, he said, surprising even himself. Before the council, when I was still soft, Maeve tilted her head. Do you remember the song? He nodded. His throat tightened. He hadn't thought of it in years. But it came slow and raw, his voice broken and soft, the melody alien yet unmistakably mournful. The shuttle didn't seem to mind. It echoed gently from the walls. When he finished, Maeve didn't clap or analyze or ask what it meant. She just whispered, that was beautiful. Tears welled again in Zalrex's secondary eyes, and he didn't hide them. Not this time. Because in that moment, he understood something vast and terrible and breathtaking. The council had never really feared human weapons. They feared this. The ability to see even a sworn enemy and still reach for them, to forgive what couldn't be undone, to listen to a dying alien song and call it beautiful. He turned his head slowly, meeting Maeve's gaze. Why do you help those who broke? You, he asked, almost afraid of the answer. She stared out the viewport for a long time. Below, Earth spun in its dance of blues and greens and clouds. Her voice was quiet when it came, because if we stopped doing that, we become like you. There was no cruelty in the words, only truth. And it wrapped around Zalrex like a balm and a blade, and he began to understand. Not just what they had tried to destroy, but what they had failed to become. Asterisk, asterisk, the Earth's orbit loomed larger with every passing minute, a breathtaking marble of greens and oceans and scars that refused to fade. From the shuttle's viewport, it looked impossibly alive, a planet that had been cut open and stitched back together, with threads of light and resistance and the ghost of every war it had survived. But beneath that beauty, deeper than the clouded stratosphere, something ancient stirred. Zalrex could feel it now, not as an invading presence, but like a memory awakening in his bones, as though Earth itself was watching him return, patient and unforgiving. Maeve noticed the way he twitched, the distant look tightening in his eyes. You feel it, don't you? She asked quietly. He didn't answer, not with words. His tendrils fluttered in involuntary waves, translating fear in a language older than speech. He wasn't sure how to describe it. It was not a weapon. Not a consciousness like the synthetic gods the council once worshipped. It was something more primal, something so impossibly old that even the first stars might have knelt before it. It had no voice, no face. But it had responded when the chains fell over Earth. Maeve leaned back in her seat, arms folded across her chest. We call it the deep echo. That's the closest name we've got. Not all humans believe in it. Some say it's superstition. Others think it's some leftover psychic residue from ancient life. But people like me, people who've seen what happened to the council planets after you tried to shatter us, we know better. Zalrex swallowed hard, every memory clawing its way to the surface. After the invasion began, Earth's resistance hadn't come from its militaries, not at first. The retaliation had been slow, almost disjointed. But then things changed. Strange things. Ships malfunctioned in ways that defied engineering. Entire council colonies forgot their own names. AI that had never aired became obsessed with human. Music then went mad when they couldn't understand it. Dreams spread like viruses. Empires fell to hallucinations. And worst of all, a silence began to grow in the minds of council leaders, an unbearable, echoing void that left them unable to speak without sobbing, that no one had fired a single Terran doomsday weapon, no war fleets, no death rays. It had all come from something else. A tide rising. I was on Raxon Prime, he said, voice trembling, when it began. I saw the Minister of Blood fall to her knees. She wept for hours. For a human child she had never met. She didn't understand. Why? None of us did. Maeve nodded. It reaches through empathy. That's what we think. Something about what we bury in our pain. Something that watches not through satellites or scans, but through emotion, memory, trauma. When the council cracked our world open, they didn't realize they were digging too deep. Not into the Earth's core, but into the core of what it means to be human. Zalrux pressed a trembling claw to his chest. But what is it? A weapon? No, Maeve said simply. It's not a weapon, it's a mirror. Her words hung in the air like a verdict. You didn't just hurt us. She continued. You made us remember all the worst parts of ourselves. The genocides, the betrayals. The betrayals we swore we'd never repeat. But instead of crumbling, we turned inward. And that woke something up. Like our pain had roots deeper than we knew. Something that remembers the first child who cried under a sky without stars. Something that never forgot what it meant to lose everything and still choose mercy. Zalrux stared at her, horrified. We unleashed it? Maeve shook her head. No, you asked for it. The moment you tried to shatter our spirit, it answered, but not in violence, in reflection. She stood, walking to the viewport, placing her hand on the glass. It doesn't kill you, Zalrux. It makes you see, really see, what you've done, what you've become. That's why the council fell, not because we crushed you. Because you couldn't survive the truth. Zalrux felt his breath catch, a whimper escaping before he could stop it. He had wondered why he was spared, why his mind hadn't been torn apart like the others, but now he understood it had let him live. Not as mercy, not as punishment, but as witness, and perhaps as penance. Maeve turned to him, her expression unreadable. Whatever it is, it doesn't judge, it only reveals. What you do with that is yours to carry. For a long moment, nothing was said. Only the hum of the shuttle and the sound of the earth getting closer. And in that quiet, Zalrux realized. The greatest weapon humanity had ever created wasn't forged from steel or algorithms. It was the unbearable weight of conscience, something no empire could armor against. Something the council never saw coming because it didn't come with rage. It came with remembrance. The descent through Earth's atmosphere should have been beautiful. Clouds parting in golden trails, the curve of continents sliding beneath them, oceans glowing with the soft light of a recovering world. But Zalrux didn't feel awe. He felt dread. The deeper they sank, the more he felt it something vast brushing against his mind, like fingers trailing the surface of water. It didn't invade. It simply noticed, as if his presence was a flicker on its senses, and it was watching with the quiet patience of something that had waited eons to be acknowledged. Maeve said nothing at first. She was focused on landing protocols, guiding the shuttle toward a humanitarian zone nestled in the crumbling remains of what had once been Central Europe. The land bore the marks of fire and invasion, yet there were signs of life again. Farmland tilled by hand. Drones dropping crates of seeds. Children chasing rebuilt solar panels like toys. Rebirth clinging to destruction like vines through stone. And then Maeve received the message. The console blinked twice. She froze mid-motion, eyes narrowing at the transmission. Zalrux watched her face pale in a way he hadn't thought humans could. Like all the blood had rushed inward. Like she was holding something inside too painful to say out loud. What is it? He asked, but she didn't respond right away. She did. Her voice was tight. You weren't the only one who fled. A council vessel landed yesterday, half buried outside the Ural Shield Zone. The surviving crew, they're trying to escape. They've taken hostages, civilians, dozens of them. Zalrux felt his stomach twist. Why? Maeve's gaze was distant. Because they think if they reach orbit, they can outrun what's happening to them. They think it's Earth that's broken them, not themselves. He tried to stand, but his body failed him. He collapsed back into the medbed with a hiss of pain. They'll die, or worse. They'll take innocence with them, she said. And I can't let that happen. Something was shifting in her. The calm of the medic was being swallowed by something heavier duty, maybe, or guilt. She tapped a few keys and changed their flight path, not toward the recovery station, toward the ruins near the Ural Range. A red zone. Not just physically, but spiritually. A place where the council's influence had once run deepest. The soil still screamed at night, or so the survivors said. I'll go, she said. I have a chance to talk to them. Maybe stop them before the worst happens. You're not armed, Zalrux croaked. I'm not going to shoot them. They will shoot you. She paused and turned. There was no bravado in her face, only resolve. That's a risk I'll take. He stared at Her, something breaking inside his chest, not from fear for himself, but from what he saw in her. This woman who had lost everything, who had seen her home burned and still chosen to bind the wounds of her enemies. And now she was going to walk into a lion's den without a weapon. Because she still believed in them? Even now, then let me speak, he said suddenly. Maeve looked at him, skeptical. You can barely stand. Let me try, he insisted. They'll know me. If I can reach them first, maybe I can stop this. She hesitated. It was a long, painful silence filled with the weight of responsibility. Finally, she nodded once. 10 minutes later, Zalrek stood, trembling but upright, armored in makeshift supports and painkillers, strapped into the co-pilot seat as the shuttle touched down in the Ural wastelands. The air outside was gray, thick, with the ghosts of war. Broken towers lay like bones across the valley, and in the distance, a signal flare rose, a desperate message scrawled in fire and desperation. Maeve turned to him before the doors opened. You don't owe us anything, she said quietly. You could stay here, be safe. But Zalrux only shook his head, the fire in his chest no longer fear. I owe you everything. He stepped into the ash-blown wind, leaving the comfort of the shuttle behind, not because he believed in redemption, but because for the first time he believed in her, and that was enough. Asterisk, asterisk, they walked into a world made of dust and echoes. Every step forward felt like wading through the aftermath of a scream that had never stopped. The ruins were silent, broken teeth of ancient cities jutting from poisoned soil. Between the cracks, old machines flickered with dying power and scorched. Banners of the council lay rotting underfoot, forgotten symbols of forgotten dominion. The signal flare had led them here, to a crater where metal glinted and the desperate hum of life whispered from below. Maeve moved with steady focus, her boots crunching softly against debris. Zalrek limped beside her, wrapped in a reinforced brace and his own stubborn will. His body trembled with each motion, but he refused help. Pride had long since left him, but this wasn't about dignity. It was about showing the truth on his face. If the others saw weakness in him, maybe they would recognize it in themselves too. Maybe that would make them listen. A fractured hangar door stood crooked in the crater's wall, half submerged in the rock slide of a building collapse. Maeve raised a small beacon, pulsing soft blue, indicating peace. No weapons. No violence. A final chance dot. It didn't take long. 3 figures stepped from the shadows, draped in salvaged armor, weapons trembling in their hands. They were different species, one tall and sinewy, skin like tarnished bronze, another squat and thick-shelled, dragging a wounded limb, and the last, unmistakable, council warbreed, bred to command by terror and fire. Her name was Lovin. Zalrux remembered her. She had once spoken in the Senate with a voice like thunder, dismissing humanity as an infestation. She stared now with eyes hollowed by sleepless nights and grief. Zalrux, she rasped, her voice brittle and raw. They said, You were dead. I was, he replied, his voice ragged but calm. Or I should have been. Earth saw fit to disagree. She stepped forward, fury warring with confusion in her expression. You came here with one human? Are you mad? They poisoned the stars. They infected us with something we cannot undo. I hear their voices in my sleep. I dream in their memories. They didn't do this to you? Zalrux said softly. You did it to yourselves. A silence fell like a hammer. The other 2 council survivors shifted, uncertain. Maeve didn't speak. She didn't need to. This was not her battle. You would betray your own species. Levin hissed. I already did, he said, stepping closer. When I voted to enslave them. When I believed fear was safer than understanding. But they spared me. Not with weapons. With truth. Levin raised her weapon, hand shaking. We have hostages, children. If you don't help us, they die. Maeve stepped forward then, slow and unarmed, her gaze steady. I won't fight you, but I won't let you leave this place with them. Whatever you're running from, it will follow you. Not because it seeks vengeance, because it is you, everything you ignored, everything you buried. You're all infected, Levin growled. Twisted by this echo? No, Zalrek said. It doesn't twist. It reflects. And then his voice changed. He sang "Die." It wasn't a song the others knew. It wasn't even one Maeve had heard before. But it came from a place that hadn't been touched by politics or pain. The song he used to sing as a child, with his siblings' laughter echoing in the background. A song of home, before they built the empire on bones and silence. His voice cracked with age and guilt, but he sang anyway. And the melody carried through the ruins like light cutting through fog. The warbreed flinched. The squat counselor fell to his knees, shaking. The tall one dropped her weapon, because the echo answered, not with sound, but with feeling. A flood of what had been lost, their own memories, their own empathy, everything they had tried to crush in themselves to survive in a system built on power. It came back, crashing into them like waves through shattered walls. Levin screamed. Not in rage, but in recognition, and for a moment, she saw herself, not the weapon, not the tyrant, but the child who had once reached for her dying mother and been pulled away. The moment she had chosen fear, she lowered her weapon, slowly, shaking. Her eyes met Maeve's, and something passed between them, no forgiveness. But understanding the hostages were freed, Maeve ran to them, helping them limp toward the shuttle, tears running down her face. Zalrux collapsed, his body giving out, but his heart no longer cold. Levin remained kneeling in the dust, staring at her hands. Zalrux, through blurry vision, reached out to her. It's not too late. She didn't answer. But she didn't. Pick up the gun again, and in the distance, the earth pulsed gently beneath the clouds, watching, waiting. The sun rose slowly over the fractured mountains, casting long shadows through the broken skeletons of cities and metal and sorrow. The shuttle rested on a cleared landing strip where wild grass had begun to grow again through cracks in the concrete. It was silent now. The chaos had passed, and in its place came the soft sounds of life returning wind against rusted beams, birdsong returning to skies once thick with ash, the shuffling of footsteps that no longer ran in fear. Humanity had bled for this moment, and now the world was trying to breathe again. Inside the medical bay, Zalrux lay motionless, eyes open to the ceiling where soft lights pulsed in a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. His own or the planet's? He couldn't say he was healing, but barely. His body had reached the limits of its endurance. Yet still he lived, because they had made sure he would. Maeve sat beside him, arms crossed, bandaged shoulder resting stiffly against the edge of the seat. She looked older now, not in age, but in presence. Not just a medic, not just a soldier. Something else. Someone who had chosen, over and over, not to become the monster she had every right to be. How many? He asked, voice faint as paper. How many died before the war ended? She looked at him, and he expected bitterness. But she gave him a truth he wasn't ready for. Too many to count. But not as many as we could have lost. He closed his eyes, letting the words settle into his chest. Because you fought? Because we didn't stop remembering who we were? Outside, the freed hostages were being tended to by Earth's medics, some laughing, some still trembling, others just staring at the sky as if they'd never seen it without chains. The other council survivors, what few remained, had been disarmed. They were being cared for, too, not as enemies, not even as prisoners, but as people. Shattered, confused, broken by the very thing they thought made them strong. Some wept openly. Some screamed. Some simply sat in silence, waiting for a voice in the dark that might never come. Zalrux turned his head toward the window, watching the horizon bloom with pale gold light. Do you think we'll ever be welcome again? He whispered. Maeve didn't answer right away. She leaned back in her seat, letting the silence stretch. Then she said something that cut deeper than any blade he had ever known. I don't think you should worry about being welcomed. I think you should worry about becoming worthy of it. And somehow that didn't feel like condemnation, it felt like a path. He nodded, and tears spilled down across the curve of his face, not from pain, but from the unbearable gift of still being alive. Still being seen. Outside, the deep echo pulsed. Beneath the earth. It wasn't finished, not with him, not with the others. Not with this wounded galaxy. It didn't seek revenge. It didn't demand payment. It only showed what had always been hidden. And the question it left behind was simple. Now that you know, what will you do? Zalrux whispered into the silence, not knowing if the echo heard. Not knowing if it mattered. I will remember. And far below, deep beneath the crust of the earth, where grief and mercy had once mixed in primordial soil, something older than hate seemed to forgive. The shuttle rose hours later, climbing slowly. Through the morning haze, leaving behind the scars and the survivors. Zalrux sat beside Maeve in silence, watching as Earth fell away, glowing in blue. Not a prize, not a target, but a miracle. They were not going to orbit to escape. Not this time. They were going to speak. To carry the story to the stars. To tell every world that had once voted to enslave Earth what it truly meant to be human. And maybe, if they listened, if they truly listened, they might just be saved by it.